So I would like to take you on a guided tour through the pages of a handwritten 18th century cookbook. Along the way, I will point out clues that helped me determine possible authors and a potential purpose in compiling the receipts into a book. I will begin with recounting what I learned about the place the manuscript was found, move to describing the text itself, head into a study of the people involved, and end with an analysis of purposes for writing the manuscript. We'll begin with when and where this cookbook was found. This label is attached inside the front cover of the book. The mention of location and date is significant. King William County is circled here in red to give you a sense of where this is. The day after the cookbook was found, the Battle of Hanover Courthouse ensued. 2 years later, the Battle of Cold Harbor was fought on the property of John Lumpkin. By then, the cookbook had been whisked off the premises. Where the cookbook went for safekeeping remains a mystery. John Lumpkin's wife, Mary Eliza Shelton Lumpkin, had family throughout the area. In fact, her father, Colonel Edwin Shelton, had Union troops on his Rural Plains property in May 1864. The cookbook survived and was acquired by the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts on August 17, 1967, from Mrs. Janice L. Griffith of Frederick County, Maryland. These are a few titles of receipts taken from the cookbook. I was awed by the meticulous penmanship. Most of this does not look like the handwriting of a typical 18th century person in colonial America, regardless of their degree of education. Rather, the handwriting looks more like that of one trained and hired to copy manuscripts. Let me bring your attention to the receipts for Naples biscuits and then this one to make Dalby soap. Do you notice the difference between that handwriting and the others? It has been my observation that there are at least 3 different types of handwriting in this cookbook. The various handwritings do not appear, however, until the final pages of the manuscript. This shows the beginning of the handwriting variations. It occurs at the bottom of page 87 for a receipt titled, "To Make Sugar Cakes." This is the first receipt in the cookbook to be attributed to anyone, and this one is noted to be by Mrs. Herbert. Although I do not know who Mrs. Herbert was or how she was connected to the compiler of the receipts in this cookbook, I was fascinated to learn that her name appears in another cookbook of the same time period. In Catherine Harberry's Colonial Virginia's Cooking Dynasty, she includes a transcribed manuscript cookbook of Jane Randolph. In Jane Randolph, her cookery book, 1743, a receipt appears for sugar cakes the best way. It is marked as coming from Mrs. Herbert. At this point, I became convinced that the compiler of receipts in the cookbook I am investigating and Jane Bowling Randolph knew one another well enough to have the same Mrs. Herbert sugar cake recipe in both of their cookbooks. The date written at the end of this cookbook points out the fact that it was completed only 1 year after Jane Randolph's. To further substantiate my conviction, the next 2 pages of the cookbook contain 3 receipts attributed to Mrs. Jane Randolph herself. There is a receipt titled Extraordinary Plum Cake, Between that for sugar cakes and the 3 marked as being from Randolph. This plum cake receipt also appears in Jane Randolph's cookery book. I turned my attention to Jane Randolph, wife of Richard Randolph. Her family was firmly rooted among Virginia's gentry class, who in many ways replicated the lives of their British counterparts. However, as Harbury points out in her book, Jane Randolph's receipts referenced ingredients that were not purely British, but relied upon the knowledge of Native American foodways. Harbury also points out that Jane Randolph's manuscript cookbook of 1743 heavily influenced Mary Randolph as she wrote the classic, The Virginia Housewife, first published in 1824. Using the dates of Jane Randolph's life and the place in which the 1744 manuscript cookbook was found, I began investigating the families from whom John and Mary Lumpkin came. I found some compelling links in Mary Lumpkin's family. Mary's great-grandparents, John and Eleanor Shelton, and her great-great-grandfather, William Parks, were of most interest to me based on information I learned about their lives and work. In 1929, A.E. Whitaker wrote that John and Eleanor Shelton were of rural plains. Barbara Yoakum, in her 2012 history of the Shelton family, wrote that it is not clear if John and Eleanor resided there, because although John owned that property, he also owned another property nearby during the years 1755 through 1763. Additionally, during the years 1739 through 1751, records placed them on Eleanor's property left to her by her father, William Parks. This property included the Hanover Courthouse. Wherever they were, John and Eleanor Shelton were never far from Richard and Jane Randolph. It is not hard to imagine Eleanor and Jane swapping recipes and to both have a fondness for the same Mrs. Herbert and her sugar cakes. Just as the Randolphs had descendants that shaped our nation, so too did the Sheltons. Their daughter Sarah married Patrick Henry in 1754. According to what may be only a myth, their marriage took place at Rural Plains. Another compelling link between the 1744 manuscript cookbook and the Sheltons was found as I learned more about Eleanor's father. William Parks was the first publisher of the Virginia Gazette, beginning in August of 1736. According to an article about Parks written by David Rawson in 2021, Parks' work was well regarded, and it often complimented the local gentry of Virginia. William Parks published more than the Gazette, however. He also published a yearly almanac and 3 or 4 books each year, most of them by Virginia authors. One of the books he published was The Complete Housewife, the first cookbook to be printed in America. The original, written by Eliza Smith, had previously been published in London in 1727 and was a bestseller there. Rawson supposes that Parks saw the opportunity to provide women of Virginia's gentry class with the ability to mimic the tables of their London counterparts. Parks edited Smith's cookbook slightly, deleting receipts due to, in his words, the ingredients or materials for which are not to be had in this country. After the alterations were made, he printed the book in 1732. I thought it might be possible that the 1744 manuscript cookbook could be related to the Complete Housewife. I analyzed the receipts found in both. Although the 1744 manuscript cookbook did not include headings, the receipts found on the first 86.5 pages were organized into discernible categories. The receipts found within the Complete Housewife were arranged under headings. I have color-coded like categories in order to better observe possible relationships between both books. I also felt there may be connections between Jane Randolph's cookbook and the 1744 manuscript cookbook. This shows some of what I found. The 1744 manuscript cookbook did not have any reference to native to Virginia only ingredients. Additionally, despite a few receipts appearing in both books, there were quite a few differences between the two. In examining the history, contents, and appearance of the 1744 manuscript cookbook, and through comparing it to other cookbooks of the same time and place, I feel fairly confident that Eleanor and/or John Shelton embarked on compiling the first 86.5 pages of the receipts. The question becomes why? Was it to have become a keepsake of favorite foods and helpful medicines for family? I don't think so. The majority of the receipts appear to be written at the same time and in the same ink in a predetermined order. In my own family cookbooks, recipes are in various inks and would be in no particular order if it were not for binders and hole punches. Was it written to direct those who cooked, baked, and made medicine for the household? I don't believe this was its purpose either. As Harbury noted, and as I observed, the pages were free of food stains and remained clear and easy to read these centuries later. Could its purpose be, then, to become a means of bringing income to the Sheltons? This is an intriguing possibility. David Rawson points out in his article that records indicate William Park's substantial estate was consumed by debts owed and litigation fees due to his unexpected and untimely death in 1750, while on his way back to England to pick up more materials for his print shop. Additionally, in Yoakum's Shelton family history, she quotes Patrick Henry's words in his 1768 ledger referring to his father-in-law. He was greatly distressed for money, and his estate like to be seized and sold for a trifle. Perhaps John and Eleanor were hoping a trifle would save their estate. Despite the social, cultural, and political connections the Sheltons had, they seemed to be experiencing financial difficulties at some point. Perhaps the 1744 manuscript cookbook was compiled in hopes of having it published, easing some of the financial stress. Because Eleanor's father had been in the printing industry, it seems reasonable to assume that she and John were aware of how to go about getting a book published. We may never know if this theory is accurate, or if so, why the manuscript was never published. We do know that generations of the Shelton family continued to live in the area, that they gained much wealth, that they played important roles within their communities, and that they continued to move among the gentry class. We also know that for generations, the Shelton family enslaved people to work on their properties and in their homes. It may be that the individuals forced to prepare meals and medicines were directed by receipts similar to those found in the 1744 manuscript. It is very likely that future Shelton family receipts would be heavily influenced by the knowledge and cultures of the enslaved cooks working in their homes.